Hello, world. I am Tina White, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the executive director of Blue Ridge Pride, and I am delighted. We've had music, we've had food, later on we'll have media. I think a lot about our country's youth, and that's what this segment is devoted to, and I'd like to welcome to the stage Adrian Parra, pronouns she, he, them. Adrian is the executive director of Youth Outright, and we'll be learning a lot more about them. And Adrian is joined by Marquis, pronouns Z and he. And Ash is a youth fellow at Youth Outright.
Thanks for having us, Tina.
Thank you for coming. Okay, well, let's just start. Youth Outright. Tell people about Youth Outright.
Yeah, I'd love to. Youth Outright, we are a support and advocacy organization for LGBTQIA plus youth across Western North Carolina. So that looks like a few different things. We provide direct services to our young folks. That looks like after-school programs. Since the pandemic, that's all been virtual on Discord, Tuesday through Thursday. We also do education around social justice issues like gender justice, racial justice. We support the GSA clubs in Western North Carolina and actually across the state. We have about 57 clubs across the state that are student-led groups inside schools and in communities. And we do fun community events like we do a queer prom once a year.
We'll need to talk more about that and so people can find it. Ash, why do we need Youth Outright?
Youth Outright is important because it gives community to queer folks in the area, like within small communities, like on the after-school programs, as well as like across the whole area with connecting GSAs. And it gives youth a voice, which I think is something that's very important about it. And I was one of a few youth who helped to organize a protest against some legislation last year. And that really, so through Youth Outright, we really, got a chance to, voice what we were worried about with this anti-queer legislation. And that was really powerful.
That's a great segue to legislation. It sounds like you didn't fix it forever, did you?
Well, the attacks keep coming, right? So last year we saw House Bill 358, which is a ban on trans youth sports, which is actually still active within the House right now, as well as a medical care ban, and now 3 senators introduced House Bill 755, which is essentially a copycat of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. And so it seems like every year we're dealing with a new piece of policy that is negatively affecting our young people, right? And so specifically, if folks aren't familiar with 755, it sets up a few different things. So it bans any conversation of gender and sexuality for kindergarten through 3rd grade. But when you really think about that holistically, that means that we can't talk about cisgender identities. That means we can't talk about heterosexual relationships. That means that we can't talk about, today I can tell you that there are teachers who are LGBTQ identified here in Western North Carolina and across the state, who are afraid to put up pictures of their significant others or their families on their desks, right? And that's prior to any of this legislation potentially passing, right? So I think there's a lot to be said around how negatively impactful legislation like 755 can be, not just on our young people, right, but also on the teachers that are supporting our young people, also on the LGBT families, right, that are in the area. Ash, do you want to add anything along to that?
Yeah, part of this bill is that it would require teachers to out students that they believe might be trans. And I was outed to my school through Power School putting my dead name up on a couple of seating charts, and that outed me as trans to my class. And I have a very supportive school and a very supportive family, and that was still an intensely uncomfortable experience. So I can only imagine how this would be for trans youth who might be outed to unsupported families under this bill.
Could you elaborate a little bit more? I don't think people appreciate how terrifying it must be to be a youth in today's world, and now not only you're at risk of being bullied by peers, but now you can't talk to teachers, you can't talk to doctors. Where would you turn as a youth for help?
Probably to Youth Outright, and to like get some community there, especially if you can't have community within your school.
Yeah, and one thing I'll put out there for folks who might be either today here in the audience or listening at home is we help folks start new clubs, right? Whether or not that's associated with a school. We have some clubs who the school climate is too hostile, right? So they meet at the local library or they meet somewhere else, right? And that's totally attainable, and we can support that as well. I think Ash really touched on something really important around this bill. The mandated reporting piece of this, right? It is really violent. When we know that LGBTQ youth across the board suffer homelessness at 120%, their cisgender and heterosexual counterparts, this specific legislation, even if a young person asks, what does gay mean? What does trans mean? In a class, that teacher is then required by law to report that to their parents. If their parents are not affirming, if their parents are not supportive, this can very quickly lead to a situation where the young person is suddenly without a home. This is not uncommon in our area. This is, and for our specific community, our only youth shelter just closed. I don't know if folks know about that, but Trinity Place just closed. And so the resources available to our homeless young people are really thin, next to nil. And so legislation like this could potentially make more young people homeless and force them into really unsafe situations.
Let's talk about what world you'd like to have for our youth. What does inclusive schooling look like?
I think inclusive schooling looks like talking about all kinds of identities and expressions in the classroom, definitely including queer identities in that, and in all kinds of subjects like history and sex ed. And this not only includes students who usually aren't included in the curriculum, but also gives a fuller education to everybody.
Yeah, one thing that we've learned is that gender and sexuality education actually reduces bullying for everybody, right? Not just for our queer and trans young people, but heterosexual cisgender boys experience less bullying and less feelings of self-harm and less suicidal ideation when schools have a gender and sexuality alliance, and when there's a more tolerant culture at that school. So really cultivating, compassion and respect for all folks helps everyone, right?
That's a great point. You mentioned homelessness, and I was disappointed when we passed the non-discrimination ordinance that some of the people who are most vocal against having a non-discrimination ordinance were against it because it would allow LGBTQ people into shelters. And over 40% of LGBTQ people who are homeless report being denied access to a shelter. And I just don't understand the sense of that.
And on top of that, HUD just made a ruling that we're not allowed to prioritize LGBTQ young people in housing. They're calling that discrimination based on sex and gender, which is a funny use of Title IX. But, these problems really compound on each other, and you're right, Tina. Oftentimes in traditional shelters or traditional sort of crisis resources, especially in our region, a lot of those things are associated with churches, and sometimes those churches are affirming, but sometimes they're not, and they'll turn people away from life-saving care and resource, and it's violent. It's killing people.
Wow. Anything to add, Ash? Oh, that's okay.
Sorry.
I was going to move us to a very different topic. So,
Segue to something different.
the prom. Tell us about the prom.
Yeah. I mean, part of healing is celebrating, right? Yes, we're under attack, but also there's so much beauty in our community. And if young folks between the ages of 14 and 20 are interested in attending, tickets are available on our website, youthoutright.org. And those are no one turned away for lack of funds, right? We're asking a suggested $25 donation, but if you can't afford that for any reason, all you have to do is email us. We'll give you a promo code. You can get in. We don't want finances to be a barrier to that. Anything else that you want to say about prom, Ash?
Yeah, I'm really excited to attend. I'm really excited to connect with all of this wonderful queer community in the area, and just really be myself to the fullest extent there.
So let me ask a question, because a lot of youth are questioning or they're thinking about their identity. How queer do you have to be to feel welcome at the prom?
All folks are welcome, right? There is no queer enough test at the door, right? We're not going to count how many pieces of pride swag you're wearing or anything like that. Folks show up as your authentic selves, and I don't know, is there anything you want to say to that, Ash?
Yeah, I think, everybody's welcome at prom, and I think that we're all going to have a really great time together, and everyone, I think that one of the best parts of it is that everyone can really, like you said, show up as their authentic selves. And I don't think that a lot of people really get that opportunity at their school proms, so it's really important to have that prom space where people can be fully queer and be fully themselves.
I remember feeling straitjacketed at my prom, and I kind of was. It was a lime green suit that I would never recommend. It was horrible. But when I went to your last prom, I believe, and it was just free flowing. It was, and everyone just seemed relaxed, which was not my memory of prom. So that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. And again, we need to really fight and help others to really think about the implications of all this legislation. It is bullying our youth. It is creating, not just for LGBTQ youth, it is creating an environment that takes me back to the 30s in Germany, where you reported on everyone. It's just, it really, it's not good. And I would encourage everyone to check out prom. It's really cool. It's a lot of fun.
If folks are interested in supporting prom, but maybe you're an elder who doesn't get to participate, you can absolutely, you can text QProm to 53555, and we are still fundraising for it. So if you want to help us throw this incredible celebration for these young folks, you can support us in that way. There's also opportunities to volunteer if you email us through our website as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.